The date is October 31st, 1941. The location is the freezing, storm-tossed waters of the North Atlantic, roughly 600 miles west of Iceland. Here, a German submarine known as U-552 runs quietly on the surface, using the cover of darkness to approach its target. This vessel is a Type 7C, the standard attack boat of the German fleet. On its tower, a grinning red devil is painted, a symbol that will soon become famous across the ocean. The commander, Erich Topp, has guided his crew into the path of a massive convoy. These merchant ships are carrying vital supplies to Great Britain. However, the situation is politically delicate. The warships escorting these supplies are not British. They belong to the United States Navy. At this specific time, Germany and the United States are not officially at war. The Americans are technically neutral, yet they are actively shielding the convoy from German attacks. Topp watches through his optics as the shapes of destroyers zigzag around the slower cargo ships. The visibility is poor, and the seas are rough. He spots a warship positioning itself between his U-boat and the merchant vessels. He must calculate the speed and range instantly. The torpedoes are loaded, and the tubes are flooded. The crew stands ready at their battle stations, waiting for a command that could change the entire scope of the war. Topp has to decide if the shadow in his sights is a fair target or a neutral bystander. But before we examine that fateful decision, we must understand the machine that carried them there. Let's look at the origins and specific design of this German U-boat. U-552 was constructed at the famous Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg, Germany. It officially joined the Navy on December 4, 1940. This vessel belonged to the Type 7C class. While the German Navy experimented with larger long-range boats and smaller coastal ones, the Type 7C became the backbone of their submarine force. It was the perfect size to navigate the violent storms of the North Atlantic, while still carrying enough fuel and weapons to remain at sea for weeks at a time. Physically, the boat was narrow and cramped. It measured just over 220 feet from bow to stern. On the surface, it weighed about 770 tons. Propulsion was handled by two separate systems. Above the water, two powerful diesel engines drove the propellers and pushed the boat to speeds of 17 knots. These engines also turned generators that charged the massive battery banks. Once the boat dived, the crew shut down the diesels to avoid consuming the limited air supply inside the hull. They switched to silent electric motors. However, these motors were slow and drained the batteries quickly. This meant U-552 spent most of its time on the surface, only diving to attack or escape. The hull was built to withstand immense pressure. The official maximum depth was around 750 feet, though commanders often took their boats deeper in emergencies. To find targets while submerged, the boat used a sensitive listening device called a hydrophone array. This allowed the sound operator to hear ship propellers from miles away, even when the submarine was blind underwater. For offense, U-552 packed a heavy punch. It featured 5 torpedo tubes, 4 in the front and 1 in the rear. The standard load was 14 torpedoes. Early in the war, the boat also mounted an 88mm deck gun forward of the tower. This cannon was a crucial tool. It allowed the commander to destroy unarmed cargo ships on the surface without wasting expensive torpedoes. Conditions for the crew were harsh. Roughly 45 to 50 men lived in a space designed for much fewer. There were not enough bunks for everyone, so men slept in shifts, sharing the same warm bedding. One of the 2 toilets was usually filled with crates of food for the first week of the patrol. The interior was constantly damp, smelling of oil, sweat, and rotting food. Despite these hardships, the crew of U-552 developed a strong identity, symbolized by the Red Devil mascot painted on the tower. But a machine this complex required a leader who was both technically skilled and aggressively minded. The man chosen to command the Red Devil boat was exactly that type of officer. The man responsible for the success of U-552 was Erich Topp. Born in Hanover, Germany, Topp was 26 years old when he took command of the boat. He had joined the Navy in 1934 and spent years training in the complex art of submarine warfare. By the time he stepped onto the deck of the Red Devil boat, he was already a battle-hardened veteran. Before taking over U-552, Topp had commanded a smaller coastal submarine. That experience ended in a near-fatal disaster. His previous boat was rammed by a Norwegian ship while in a German harbor and sank within seconds. Topp managed to escape the sinking wreck, an event that taught him the unforgiving nature of the sea. This brush with death did not make him cautious. Instead, it seemed to sharpen his focus. When the Navy gave him the new Type VIIc, he was determined to turn it into a lethal weapon. Topp was known for his aggressive style. While some commanders preferred to stay submerged and fire from a distance, Topp often favored surface attacks at night. He would maneuver his boat into the middle of an enemy convoy under the cover of darkness. Once inside the formation, he would fire torpedoes at short range, causing chaos among the merchant ships before slipping away into the night. This tactic required nerves of steel, as it placed the fragile submarine within range of the convoy's escort ships and their guns. His skill earned him recognition as one of the most effective commanders in the German Navy. Over the course of the war, he became the third most successful submarine ace in terms of total shipping tonnage sunk. He was decorated with the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, one of the highest military honors Germany could bestow. This fame made him a national hero at home, and his Red Devil emblem became a common sight in propaganda newsreels. Despite his aggressive nature in battle, Topp was also a technically minded officer who understood the limitations of his machine. He knew exactly how far he could push the engines and how deep he could dive to escape depth charges. He demanded perfection from his crew, but he also looked out for their welfare, ensuring they remained disciplined during long, boring stretches at sea. With a capable leader and a loyal crew, the boat left the shipyard to begin its actual work. Now, we turn to the record of destruction U-552 left behind on the open ocean. U-552 began its active service in February 1941. Its first war patrol set the tone for the rest of its career. Sailing from Germany into the North Atlantic, the crew quickly proved their worth. On this maiden voyage, they sank a British tanker and a cargo ship. This success proved that the boat and its crew were ready for the front lines. Following this initial success, the submarine moved its base of operations to Saint-Nazaire on the coast of occupied France. This new base gave them direct access to the Atlantic shipping lanes without having to take the long route around the British Isles. Throughout the spring and summer of 1941, U-552 became a feared hunter. The boat operated as part of wolf packs, a tactic where groups of submarines would gather to attack a single convoy together. During these months, Topp and his men sank ship after ship, targeting vessels carrying timber, steel, and grain to Britain. The Red Devil emblem painted on the tower became a mark of lethal efficiency. One of the most significant chapters in the boat's combat record occurred in early 1942, shortly after Germany officially declared war on the United States. U-552 was one of the first German submarines sent across the ocean to attack American shipping directly off the East Coast. This operation was known to the German crews as the Second Happy Time because defenses were so weak. U-552 patrolled the waters off North Carolina and Virginia, often visible from the shore. In this area alone, the boat sank several merchant ships and tankers. The crew could sometimes see the lights of American cities and cars driving along the coast while they hunted in the dark waters just offshore. By the time its frontline career slowed down, U-552 had compiled a staggering record. The boat was credited with sinking 30 merchant ships and damaging several others. This amounted to over 160,000 tons of Allied shipping sent to the bottom of the sea. Very few submarines in history achieved such a high score. The boat survived 15 separate combat patrols, a remarkable feat considering the average lifespan of a U-boat was often only a few missions. While the patrol off the American coast was profitable in terms of numbers, it was a different mission that cemented the boat's place in history books. We must now look at the specific event teased at the beginning of this program, a confused battle that dragged the United States closer to war. We return now to the freezing morning of October 31st, 1941. U-552 is still stalking Convoy HX-156. The time is just before 5:30 a.m. The sun has not yet risen, and the Atlantic Ocean is pitch black. Commander Topp is maneuvering his boat on the surface to get a clear shot at the merchant ships. Suddenly, a warship looms out of the darkness, placing itself between the submarine and the convoy. The ship is the USS Reuben James, an older American destroyer. It is zigzagging to search for submarines. Topp sees the warship as a direct threat. In the confusion of the night, he identifies it simply as an enemy escort. He makes a split-second decision to attack the guard dog rather than the flock. He lines up his sights and orders 2 torpedoes fired. One of the torpedoes runs true. It strikes the Reuben James on the port side, near the front of the ship. The warhead detonates directly next to the destroyer's forward ammunition storage room. The explosion is horrific. A massive pillar of orange flame lights up the dark horizon. The entire front section of the American ship is blown apart instantly. The damage is so catastrophic that the bow of the destroyer sinks immediately. The rear half of the ship stays afloat for only 5 minutes. Panic ensues on the deck. Sailors jump into the freezing, oil-covered water. To make matters worse, as the wreck slides beneath the waves, its own depth charges, explosives designed to kill submarines, are triggered by the water pressure. They explode among the men swimming for their lives. Of the roughly 160 men on board, only 44 survive. U-552 dives deep to avoid retaliation. As depth charges from other escorts shake the water around him, Topp notes in his log that he has sunk a generic destroyer. He does not realize immediately that he has just sunk a United States Navy warship while his country is technically at peace with America. This attack marks the first loss of a U.S. Navy ship to hostile action in World War II, occurring more than a month before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Red Devil escapes the scene intact, leaving a diplomatic firestorm in its wake. But as the war dragged on, the hunters eventually became the hunted. We must now uncover the final fate of this legendary boat. The legacy of U-552 goes far beyond the sheer amount of steel it sent to the bottom of the ocean. Historians view this specific boat as the defining symbol of the German submarine war during its most successful period. While hundreds of other Type 7C boats were built, few achieved the legendary status of the Red Devil. It stands as the primary example of what a highly trained crew could achieve before Allied technology made their job impossible. The most lasting historical impact of U-552 remains the sinking of the USS Reuben James. This single event on that dark October morning shifted the psychological landscape of the war. Although the United States did not declare war on Germany immediately after the incident, the loss of the destroyer hardened American public opinion. It proved to the American people that the Atlantic Ocean was already a battlefield, and that neutrality was no longer a shield. The death of over 100 American sailors became a rallying cry, famously immortalized in folk songs and news articles of the time. In this sense, U-552 fired one of the first true shots of the conflict between Germany and America, weeks before the disaster at Pearl Harbor. There is also a significant legacy attached to the boat's commander, Erich Topp. Because he and his boat survived the war, Topp became a vital source of history. Unlike many other ace commanders who died at sea, Topp lived to tell his story. In the years following the war, he did something remarkable. He joined the new West German Navy and eventually became a senior admiral. He worked closely with his former enemies in NATO, sharing his knowledge of submarine tactics to help defend Western Europe during the Cold War. The Red Devil commander transformed from a feared enemy into a respected ally, bridging the gap between two different eras of naval history. Tactically, the career of U-552 serves as a case study for the happy time of the U-boat force. Its record of 15 successful combat patrols is a statistical anomaly. The vast majority of German submarines were lost after only a few missions. The fact that this boat operated from 1941 to 1944 without being sunk highlights the combination of luck, aggressive leadership, and the robust design of the Type 7 class. Today, U-552 is remembered as one of the gray wolves that nearly severed the lifeline between North America and Britain. It represents the terrifying effectiveness of the submarine as a weapon of commerce raiding. The Red Devil emblem remains one of the most recognized military insignias of World War II, symbolizing a time when a handful of small boats threatened to change the outcome of the entire global conflict. This brings our detailed look at the Red Devil boat to a close. If you enjoyed this deep dive into naval history, there is a simple way you can help us keep these stories alive. The story of U-552 shows us how a single machine and a single decision can ripple through history, affecting nations and navies long after the hull has been scrapped. If you appreciate this style of strict historical storytelling without the hype, please consider leaving a like on this video. It is a small action for you, but it makes a massive difference in helping us share this history with a wider audience. Our goal is to build a complete library of naval history here on YouTube, covering everything from the engineering of the Type 7 U-boat to the strategic decisions of the admirals. To ensure you don't miss our upcoming profiles on other famous submarines and battleships, verify that you are subscribed to the channel. Finally, I have a question for the community. Considering the confusing, violent conditions of the North Atlantic in 1941, do you believe the sinking of the Reuben James was an inevitable tragedy? Or was it a reckless escalation by an aggressive commander? I read through your comments to plan future topics, so please share your perspective below. Your engagement is what allows us to keep the research going. Thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next patrol.